Hello everybody and welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. As always, if you are new to the channel, please remember to hit that like and subscribe button so that we could keep on growing the channel and continue to bring you awesome videos like this one. Let's jump into it. Okay, so far we've been looking at a lot of basic rook endgames. Rook and pawn versus rook. We've already seen how to convert with the attacking side by reaching the Lucena position, and we've also seen a defensive method by reaching the Philidor position. But we've been looking at a lot of positions where the defending side can't quite reach the Philidor position and how to achieve a draw in those instances. Now today we're actually going to be looking at a game that happened in practice. Now this was in last week's Title Tuesday. This would have been February 25th, and it was in round 8 between International Master Renato Terry of Peru and French Super Grandmaster Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Now, after a marathon game, I believe this was on move 80 already, the players reached this position where Renato Terry, with the white pieces, plays rook takes a6. And then after king takes on b4, we reach this position, which is supposed to be a theoretical draw. Now, at this point, both players were in severe time trouble. I don't doubt for an instance that they know with their eyes closed how to draw this position, but when the clock is ticking down and you're playing on just the increment, a lot of things can happen like it did in this game. So in this position, Renato Terry correctly brings the rook over to the far side of the pawn. We've seen this idea many times where the rook is just going to harass the king from as far away as possible. MVL checks with e2, and here we see just an unexplainable blunder by Renato Terry. In this position, after king to b1, we reach a pure Philidor position. Like, there's no way to make progress here. This is a very simple draw for white. We're going to take a look at the variations. But here he goes with king to c1, which is losing on the spot. We're going to see why this is losing here in just a second. But going back to the position with king b1, there's not much here that the black side can do to make any progress. So for example, if you go king to b3, threatening mate in 1, right? We always have rook to h3 check. And here there's several moves, or just a couple of moves that black can try. We have king c4, and white is just going to keep harassing from the side of the board. Rook to h4 check, king c5, rook check again. And if you try to hide behind the pawn, right, with the idea that we're going to advance the pawn and create a bridge, kind of like use the pawn to block the checks, it doesn't quite work. So white keeps the rook here on his 4th rank, trying to stop, cutting off the board to stop the advance of any of the pieces. You could go b4, and we bring the rook now to the 3rd rank with the same idea. The king continues following the pawn, but here, like a typical Philidor fashion, as soon as the pawn hits the 3rd rank, or the opposing player's 6th rank, in this case it's reaching the 3rd rank, right? The rook drops all the way back, and we're just going to deliver an endless amount of checks that the king cannot hide from. And if you try to get close to the rook, the pawn is going to drop, okay? So then after rook h3, you can also maybe try king to a4. It's the same idea. We're just going to keep checking. We use the pawn to create that bridge. The rook drops to the 3rd rank, cutting off the king and the pawn from advancing, and the pawn moves forward. And again, as soon as the pawn hits the 3rd rank, an endless amount of checks. There's nowhere that you could go. Okay, after rook h3 check, in this position, instead of advancing the pawn, or instead of advancing the king, like if you were going to, you could never dislodge the king from the b1 square. Like if you try to give any checks or anything like that, the king is always going to stay on that square. So you have to try and advance with the king, but we've already seen that that's not an effective method once we reach the Philidor position. So very simple draw in this position after king to b1. Inexplicably though, Terry goes for king to c1. MVO correctly plays king b3, and the idea is not so much like in the other line that we're threatening mate in 1, but we want to bring the king over to a2 from where it defends the promoting square. So after rook to h3 check, king comes into a2, and all of a sudden this pawn is marching forward very fast. Now in this position it gets a little bit tricky because Renato Terry goes for rook to h4. We already see the winning move highlighted. Rook to h4. And also here, an inexplicable move. MVO goes with rook to e5, which is a blunder. So we go from a winning position here. We go from draw to a winning position to draw again, rook e5. And the reason that this move is, well, quote unquote, losing, right? The loses the full point is because it allows rook h2 check. And the reason that this move is important is because all of a sudden we are removing the king from the a2 square from where it controls b1, and once the king steps away, we could bring our king over to b1. So we once again achieve the Philidor after having blundered with king to c1 and getting into this losing position. Rook e5 allows us to reach this Philidor position once again. Some variations here. If black were to try king c4, again, just king b1 is very, very simple. And here we see again the idea, if after rook to b6, if you were going to attempt to go rook e1, it's the same idea that we saw before. You can never remove that king from the square that it needs to be, which is b1. So the pawn and the king have to advance to try to make progress here. So we have b3 on the board, and then once again we see the same maneuver. As soon as the pawn hits the third rank, the rook drops back. Now this position is a little bit tricky because here black can attempt to play rook to b5. So from here it's kind of like trying to block the checks from behind. But because the rook is on the far side of the pawn and very far away from the king, if we can't check from behind, we can always check from the side. So we have rook to g4 check, king f6, rook to g3 check, or no, excuse me, king c3, rook to g3 check, and the checks just continue going on. And as soon as the king steps away just far enough, we can bring our king forward with b2, and there's just absolutely no way for black to make any progress. They come closer, attacking the rook with king to f3, and then the rook can just drop back to the 8th rank. Now we're going to check from behind. So there's absolutely no way to make progress here. Check, and again, you're far enough. So now we're going to swing back to the far side of the board again, and we're going to continue checking from the side. So yeah, even though black tries to be a little bit tricky with bringing the rook over to b5, the drawing method, the idea is still the same. We're always going to harass the king from the far side of the board, whether it be from the back or from the side. However, in this position, white goes with king c2 and once again allows a winning position for the black pieces. But let's go back here for a second and see, okay, so if rook e5 is a blunder, well, here's a problem. The rook comes to h4. And it's the same idea. We're cutting off the board so that the pawn can no longer advance. And it feels like we're not making any progress if we have to step back with the king after we've already reached the square that we want to reach, right? How do I remove? Okay, after we've already reached the square. Now, granted, king a3 should probably still be winning, but we've seen this winning idea many, many times already in some of the past videos. And that is that the rook is going to defend the pawn from the front so it could start marching forward. So rook b2 is a great move. I'm actually going to annotate here. Good move. Rook b2 is a winning move, and this is an idea that will definitely it will definitely give us a lot of points to have this in our arsenal. So after rook b2, things become very, very difficult for white. So rook comes to h3. And the pawn is just marching forward. Now white, the defending side, can try a couple of moves here. So number one is dropping back to h8. Doesn't really help white's cause. We have rook b1 check, And we have a couple of moves here that white can try. If king c2, we have b3 check, and when the king steps away, very clever move here, rook a1. So the idea is we're just going to move the king away, and then we're going to defend the pawn from the side. So for example, rook to a8, we have king to b1, and when the rook comes back to attack, we have b2. So king steps in, threatening to take the pawn here, and then we have rook a3 check, forcing the king to step away, and then just king a2, and there's nothing that you can do to stop the promotion of this pawn, right? So another attempt, instead of rook to h8, is we're going to try and be a little bit more stubborn here and keep the rook on the third rank to make it as difficult as possible to advance the pawn. You can still advance it though, because the rook is in a great position here on b2, assisting the advance of the pawn. And here you could try, for example, as soon as a pawn reaches a third rank, we go with the same idea, bringing the rook back to the 8th rank. But in this case, it doesn't work because the position is too advanced for the black pieces. So we have rook check. The king has to step away. The king comes into b2. Now the rook steps in behind the pawn to make it as difficult as possible, right? To keep pressure on the pawn and get the king out of the way so we can advance it. But now here we see the idea, rook a1, king d3, and the rook comes over to a3 to defend the pawn so we could step forward with the king. And after king d2, king b1, king comes into c3 once again to attack this pawn. Now we've seen this idea before in prior examples. We have b2 check, king has to step away, and the king comes to a1, and when the king steps closer again to attack this pawn, obviously we can't queen because rook takes, but we have rook a2, threatening a discovery and promoting at the same time, and this is pretty much game over. So rook b2 in this position would have been a fairly simple win here for MVL, and this is pretty theoretical as well. So pretty surprising blunders back to back from very, very high level players. Now after rook e5 though, which is a draw we've already seen because of rook h2 check, Renato Terry steps in with king to c2, which kind of makes sense. It's an intuitive move. We're bringing the king closer to the pawn, but it doesn't work because you have rook c5 check. Because we have the opposition, it forces the king to step away. So the king comes to d3. Now the king comes in closer. The idea is we're going to assist in bringing this pawn forward so that the rook doesn't take it. The rook comes into h2, trying to be as bothersome as possible. The king is cut off, right? So we can't reach the desired square b1, but we're going to see how MVL deals with that very easily. Rook c3 check. You have to come in to d4. Obviously, if you go here, you have rook c2 check, and goodbye to the rook. b4, and the rook stays on the second rank, and now we have rook c2. So we just create the bridge with the rook here so that we can advance with our king. Rook gives a check, king comes to b2. Renato Terry now trying to attack from behind, but doesn't quite work because the king, we're going to reach the Lucena position, but it's like a Lucena position on steroids almost, because there's many ways to win this, and we're going to see here in just a bit. King gets in closer, and now very good move. This rook comes into c8, stepping away from the danger, but at the same time keeping the rook on the c file, cutting off the king from any possible help it may offer. So the rook comes into b7. And here we see this position, and we've achieved a Lucena position. And here Terry offered the path of least resistance, to be honest. After this check, he played king to c3. And after king here, it's basically just game over. Now, obviously, you can't take the pawn because of check. And then if the king steps away, we take the rook. And if the king comes into b3, we have b8 check. And the rook is going to fall. So because of that, he goes for rook to h7. Now, in any case, if the rook hadn't been on the d file here, you have to be very, very careful, because if you queen, and for example, let's say the rook is here, you have check, and then of course it's just checkmate, right? The rook would have to come here into e1, and then we would just have rook captures checkmate. Very, very sneaky. But because the rook is on d8, we can queen without any issues. We can promote, and after rook h1 check, it's game over, right? Now, but let's say if white had not gone with king c3 and go with king e2 instead. Now, there's several ways to win this. Of course, the classic Lucena position is creating the bridge here on our 5th rank, the defender's 4th rank, right? So is rook d5, and the king just marches forward, right? And after we get all these checks, this is, I believe, was the very first video that we took a look at how to win this position. It's just game over. We block the check. The king is too far away to get to the pawn, and we're going to be promoting on the next move. However, in this position, after king e2, this position is so interesting. It's so winning. We can actually create a bridge on the h file. And this is a lot simpler and a lot faster, right? So we have king c2. And once again, the very clever move, which we've seen time and again, rook to a2, defending the pawn and threatening a discovery here with b1 check, double check actually with the rook and the queen, and basically just game over. So very, very instructive endgame from both of these players. We see what happens when you don't play correctly and then you get a winning position, and we see what happens when you don't convert the winning position, how there are still defensive ideas to try and salvage the half point. Fortunately for Terry, though, it was one too many blunders. We saw king c1 blunder, we saw king c2 blunder, and that was the last one. MVL let him go once. He wasn't going to let him escape again. So very instructive. We see the importance of knowing these rook endgames, right, and how they can help us in either saving a lot of half a points or even gaining a full point in positions which should be a theoretical draw. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.